Hello and welcome to another edition of the Future World Alliance Speaker Series. We're very excited to bring you today's talk. The Future World Alliance works to empower people to drive economic and social transformation. We believe that through collaboration and collective action, we can create a world where the abundance of human ingenuity and creativity is not constrained by the limits of human nature. Our focus is on responsible AI education, particularly K through 12, internationally. Thank you, and we hope you enjoyed today's speaker session.
What I'm going to present on is the future of education, health, and technology in Uganda. So that's going to be our focus here, and I'll try to rifle through these quickly for you. And there will be occasion, I hope, to dovetail with what Cyrus is saying about all kinds of areas here and how blockchain might assist in some of what we're talking about here. So what I'll do is I'll share what I've been doing there and continue to do, and what some failures as well in Uganda. So just so you know where Uganda is, in case you don't, this is in East Africa, and we're looking over here where Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda really meet around Lake Victoria. Okay, and we'll see some more points to focus on in relation to Uganda. Now, what I want to share are some collaborators that I have, and in conjunction with that, though, just to kind of prime your imagination, recalling that even in popular culture, the film Black Panther is set in a mythical Uganda, really, and does contain contents that are relevant to what I have to say here. This is a scene from the astral plane, as it's called in the film, but it is relevant to some of the work that we're trying to do out of a Harvard lab. So we're there with Sarah in a way. It's a neurology lab where we're working on mapping ancestral relationships for health. And just so you can see here, the mythical Wakanda is around something like a Uganda, Rwanda. So just to prime your imaginations and keep you mindful of that kind of thing. And also, as we lead into it, some of the ways that the work you're all doing in Future World Alliance and that we can do together might be respectful of indigenous traditions. And that's something we can talk about in relation to Uganda. So to begin, though, I'll share with you an organization that's not mine, but one with which I'm collaborating in Luwero, which is the district in red here. And it's a district in Uganda that suffered all kinds of violence at the end of last century and ongoing, and also ecological destruction. And so the Bethany Land Institute, which is started by three friends you'll meet in a moment, one of whom I work with closely, Father Emmanuel Katangale, is trying to renew the land and also bring about education reformation for students and really returning people to the land because of the high unemployment rate and inequities that exist in Uganda. There's Father Emmanuel Katangale, one of the founders there in the middle, who's also a professor at Notre Dame and professor of philosophy, theology, and international peace studies. But what they say is part of their project is to bring about employment for the youth, right? And to do this, I mean, they're in a position where unemployment is very high. I think it's well over 35% now, and you can see some of the age differences here. And so there's a very large number of youth coming up in Uganda who basically don't have access to work and don't have access to technology. So that's something that we can talk about too with respect to what we were finishing up a moment ago. But there are great promises there for involving people in returning to how to reconnect with the land and reforest and be involved in land restoration projects that can also involve technology, because what we're trying to do actually is to partner with ESRI through this work of the Bethany Land Institute to try to map the trees that they're planting and some of the restoration projects that they have on the ground there, which will also involve economic impact. So there's some really interesting ways to be involved with companies that work remotely. You'll meet another one here in a moment. That are only possible maybe because of Web 2, hopefully for Web 3, given Sarah's input. But you can see here one of their projects too, ESRI's projects with ArcGIS, is conservation of Amazonian superfruits, and that's something I hope to help the Ugandans that I'm working with do for their own land and their own medicinal properties for plants that they use in traditional healing medicines that are being lost to deforestation and ecological destruction because of pressures of internationalization, globalization, industrialization, and loss of land, which we can discuss later. So on a side note, connecting back with education and kind of what possibilities exist in virtual worlds and in person, I can just say personally, I took out a couple slides here that had my own kids on here, but I can say personally there's been a reconnection with the land, even for my own kids playing this game, and sourcing materials and cooking and going in different ecosystems. So there's something we could talk about if you wanted about education and youth and the future possibilities of remote education under the conditions of really immersive technologies that allow us to go from spaces like this back into the places we inhabit. So my experience was playing this game with kids who learned how to source materials for this character and set of characters in this mythical space would also then be able to hike with me and accompany me in a forest, and then start foraging and looking at mushrooms and learning about mycology in ways that they might not otherwise have done, which is also probably consonant with Minecraft's movement into the space of materials for in the real world that can be sourced and mined for educational purposes. Okay, back to Uganda though, and thinking about our own immersive experiences in spaces, virtual and personal, and the issues that are surrounding deforestation and some of the complications of that in Uganda. Let's just focus on a few places here. Here's a closer map of Uganda. You see Luwero here in central Uganda, which we were just talking about. And if we focus in a little bit more closely on three spots where I'm doing particular work, it's in Kampala, Masaka, and Bwindi, the far southwest, and we'll probably have some more time really to talk about basically Kampala and Bwindi mostly and what follows, okay? So just so you can see locationally what I'm talking about, where we are. One of my partners has become Backpack EMR, and this is a company run by Lori Most, and I'm very thankful for her work and for this company. They've really saved my work during COVID, which has made travel to Uganda with students and faculty and even out of university funds virtually impossible. In fact, for 2 years, we could not travel. So I had to resurrect, speaking of trust that we were just talking about before, the only way to resurrect trust in my collaborators in Uganda, who are traditional healers and people involved in healthcare and religious practices, would not continue their work with me unless I sort of had some gestures of trust and solidarity. So I bought some iPads from this company that were outfitted with their software for electronic medical records, which they're using now in HIV, AIDS care, general care, and traditional healing medicine. We got them from Kenya, from Nairobi on over to Uganda during the pandemic, which helped really save the work that I was involved in and reestablish trust with community members there. And you'll see in a moment where that's going from here. So there's a lot of, to dovetail on what Sarah was saying, a lot of collaborative opportunities that are at their rudimentary stages and need to be developed further, and with immersive technologies perhaps can be done better. So if we think again about what I was saying about the astral plane here from Black Panther and some of these connections to spirituality and indigenous cultures that we're encountering in Uganda, that will help us think about where we're going next and some of the things I have to offer. So here's a recent publication from the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene on how traditional healers are approached in medicine in Uganda in relation to biomedical interventions as well. So as you may know, herbalists throughout the world, something like 80% of the world accesses herbal medicine because of inequities and inability to access modern medicine, and maybe also distrust and with the systems that exist from colonizing countries and just concerns about modern medicine in general. So there's been an attempt to collaborate between traditional healers, who are also spiritual healers in many cases in communities like this in Uganda, and to integrate them into medical systems in the Southwest in particular. And we'll meet somebody who's done a lot of great work in that in a minute. And here's a diagram, for example, of how people navigate health decisions according to that study, and that healers are really integrated, as we know, in Uganda into the way that people seek assistance and care for themselves. And here you see again a note on trust. There's a greater trust in traditional medicine, mistrust in biomedicine, and maybe there's a lot to be said here with the kinds of tokens of trust that Sarah was talking about momentarily there. Okay, so that's just for future conversation for us. Our focus here, though, is how we're building on these ideas, and here's a map that you'll come to know from the Dond Lab out of Harvard Medical School, where they're doing social network mapping for health. But you see the last two there on the left, healer and ancestral spirits. These are additions that we're making to what the Harvard Lab is already doing in Brigham and Women's Hospital, where they're mapping social relationships for health and how well that's assisting somebody's healing. So if you want to see this, take a look on YouTube on the personal network study from Amr Dahand, who's the leader of the Dahand Lab. There, it's a former study, and they're extending that work, so you can take a look at that if you'd like. Scott is this other person who's with me this year. He's been there for a while, but he's with me this year at the University of San Francisco. I just happened to be there for the year, so I'm thankful for the opportunity. He founded a hospital in the Southwest, the Bwindi Community Hospital, and he's the one who's introduced me to traditional healers and really innovated in this idea down there in the Southwest in Bwindi, which we'll see again in a moment, with how it is that you integrate traditional healers into modern medical practice when introducing a new hospital to a region. So this Bwindi Community Hospital in the Southwest is an award-winning hospital that he initially founded to really serve the Batwa. Okay, the Batwa are a particular community of forest dwellers in the Bwindi Impenetrable National Forest, which you might know from mountain gorilla. It's where some of the few remaining mountain gorilla live and are protected. And so when the government decided to make that region of the forest a park for those preservation purposes and other purposes, the Batwa were dehumanized and really non-persons. They had no identity, no rights, no land. And so he bought some land for them to help preserve their culture, and then there's some settlements around, and since then they've become recognized as a human group and have rights, but there are all kinds of stories of abuse that we could talk about with respect to the Batwa. They are a group, as you can see here, of the Twa, so-called Twa pygmies, throughout this region of sub-Saharan Africa, and our focus is on this region here in the Great Lakes, and these are the Batwa there that you can see at the kind of the meeting point of Rwanda, the Congo, and Uganda. So that's where the hospital was founded, and he innovated in this area of finding ways to integrate healers who he knew were also important in terms of community leaders and spiritual guides in the region to collaborate with hospitals. This is a diagram here for you of the different kinds of hospitals built on the colonial history of Britain, and how there are different levels of hospitals and healthcare networks in Uganda. And what we're trying to do, along with studies like this, is to try to understand the degree to which people are really dependent on traditional healer networks, which are outside these systems, and were pre-existing systems of healing that range across physical, psychological, and spiritual healing practices that we're trying to understand further. This is a bit of a closer up version of that, so you can see the different styles of hospitals. These are all different levels. The size you see there, National Referral Hospital are some of the biggest hospitals, and they have healthcare units that go below that. And there's again the focus on the Bwindi National Park there on the left, where this hospital is located that Scott has founded and is flourishing and is an award-winning hospital now for its innovations. This just gives you a little sense of the hierarchy of these different organizations in terms of the healthcare network, and how we might be able to build in, and people have already built into their studies, the way that informal health networks influence people's health-seeking behavior. This is an area, I believe, where there can be considerable innovation in technology and future technologies for what we can do with communities who have access, at least. Okay. Here I'm introducing you to a healer that I've come to know in Kampala. So just changing regions briefly to give you a notion of a healer. This is Father Anatoly Waswa with his herbs next to him. He's an herbalist healer, and we've done some work in Scranton before I left there for the year to go to the University of San Francisco to take the research there for the year with a student to map his herbal remedies. And that's what this is over here. It's kind of it's an attempt at a Neo4j graph database and mapping of what components, herbal components are involved in the decoction, and then you can see some location data here that's de-identified patient data from where people are coming all around Kampala to see him and to receive services rather than go to medical, let's say a hospital or a clinic. And with a student, that's what this app is here. A student was developing an app with me called Herbs that he was creating so that people who had mobile phones and working with these clinics could have better access to patient records. But that's something that I'm trying to get Backpack EMR to be involved in more directly, and to get them to use their technology for those purposes. Okay. I have failed otherwise in various ways. Here's an attempt to bring coding to kids in Uganda through Clubhouse that we started a long time ago, and I've since bowed out of Clubhouse due to various reasons. But we did start some energy around trying to get coding for kids in Uganda, but one of the problems we face, not only in the work I'm doing that you've been introduced here, but also trying to bring technology and education to students in rural areas, is really this problem of inequity and access to the internet, which you can see here. The red is a region there. I mean, in orange is probably 20 to 40 users there in Uganda, if you look closely at that image, according to the International Monetary Fund, but it's pretty low in the rural areas. And so access and inequity to technologies is impacting our capacity to build infrastructure and educational opportunities in places that have high unemployment, like Uganda. Where this is going is, right now I'm on a Templeton World Charity Foundation grant with Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital on this project called Buffering Porosity and Brain Health in Uganda, where we're bringing together philosophy, religion, neuroscience, and technology to try to deal with questions of again, how people navigate their health. And we're using some ideas from the philosopher Charles Taylor to talk about the porous self in relation to the buffered self. How much do we view ourselves as influenced by let's say, spiritual factors or other factors outside of the biomedical material impacts on our lives. And the Don Lab here, you can look at it at another time if you have time, is the lab where we're based. This is Amr Dahand. He is the one who's founded the lab, and my co-PI, actually he's the PI on the project. Ian, I'm the co-PI, is the philosopher there at Harvard Medical School with whom we're working on this project. I've also been able to include Benjamin here, who is a Ugandan with me at the University of San Francisco for the year, which is fantastic. He's a specialist in pharmacology as well as in data analytics, and has dreams that we can actually apply a lot of what we're doing to Ugandan indigenous pharmacology with AI from his own expertise in data analytics and entrepreneurship. So he's now working with me also at USF as we collaborate with our Ugandan colleagues on these projects. Here's an image of, there you can see a gorilla in the background of the Bwindi Community Hospital and some of our collaborators here from that location. Again, that image of mapping social networks to include not only usual people involved in medical procedures, but also healers and ancestral spirits and ancestral relationships that are often neglected in people's accounts of how they go about seeking health. So here's our hypothesis for our research from the lab and the Templeton Foundation. And our hope is that by respecting where people are beginning in their lives in terms of their beliefs and their practices and their sacred relationships to their land are also included in our what we produce and create, maybe apropos what Sarah said at the beginning in terms of how we're creating AI and who gets to create it democratically. There's Father Anatoly again. And just quickly, if you want to see our two proposed aims, here's a beautiful picture of ours from within the park overlooking the Bwindi National Park towards really Rwanda over there to the right. But we're trying to see in what ways people's beliefs really impact their capacity to seek health and how spiritual factors might influence that. And then if there's any way to collaborate in the future with people once we find out some of this information and have better data on that, how it is that we could work with Ugandans and others around the world to bring about different kinds of biomedical and allopathic interventions that are respectful of these kinds of dynamics in people's lives. One final note is I think that this is something that I was notified about. I think that we could, given the difficulty of travel that we've experienced during COVID, but also just in general, the idea of reducing one's carbon footprint and trying to be more mindful about concerns about equity, that maybe we can have initiatives like this where people can experience not only, in this case, the lives of refugees for this film, that's an immersive film experience, but also perhaps for communities in Uganda and elsewhere where we can involve film and collaborative projects where we can bring people to countries that are otherwise incapable of accompanying us on those journeys. So that's a hope I would have for the kinds of work we could do together in terms of bringing us to spaces that many of us can't actually travel to and might find problematic or might contribute to the inequities that exist in the world. So that's a quick run through and a lot, I know, but I thought I'd throw it all out there and share that with you and offer that as conversation points for us in the Future World Alliance. So thank you so much.